Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Andres Orjuela and I'm executive chef at the Special Miami. And continuing with our last lesson where we learned to make vegetable stock from scratch, we're going to continue and learn how to make pumpkin soup. So pumpkin is a wonderful thing because it keeps for a very long time. So when you have a harvest of many pumpkins, you can keep it for months. As long as it's in cool storage, it won't lose any of its delicious flavor or nutrition. It's got a very hard shell and very dry, so all the humidity inside is trapped. Now you can buy a pumpkin whole or you can buy it sometimes cut in the supermarket, and either way is fine. If it's cut, then I would use it within a week. If it's whole, then you can even store it in some cold storage. So I got this one, and what you're looking for is again just a really solid, firm pumpkin, which means that it's full of liquid and it hasn't lost any of its richness. You don't want to see any blemishes, any cuts that would in any way compromise the pumpkin. The color, of course, if it's not cut, you can't see inside, but if you can, you want just a really rich color. And then if you can smell it, again, it just smells like very clean earth. It's got a little bit of that typical pumpkin smell, which is very, very nice. And so what we're going to do is we're going to chop up the pumpkin. We're going to mix it in a little bit of olive oil and salt, and we're going to put it in the oven. The oven, I put it at 400 degrees, and then I let the pumpkins cook for about 45 minutes. After 20 minutes, I do take it out of the oven and turn them around so that if they start getting a little brown, they'll brown evenly. And then once the pumpkin is fully cooked, then I let it cool a little bit, and then I'll mix it with the vegetable stock and blend it and add a little bit of spices and different flavors to bring it all together. But the flavor of pumpkin is so delicious it hardly needs very much. So let's go ahead and cut into this. And the pumpkin is very hard, so do be careful. What I'll do is I'll put it on its firm side and then find a way to cut through, and maybe start off by cutting it in half. We have the core here, which is really hard, so I'm just going to take that off altogether. And then we'll just cut this into little cubes. Okay, so now what I've done is I've cut my pumpkin up into thin slices. And what's difficult now about the pumpkin is that the outer shell is kind of hard to get off, and you don't want to waste a lot of the pumpkin. So that's why I cut it into thin slices, because then I can firmly put it on the cutting board and just thinly cut off the skin. So I just go around and make sure that I get all of the skin, but as little of the pumpkin as possible. Okay, and there you see, there's a little bit of green. I'll go ahead and take these last two bits off. Okay, and there we've wasted as little pumpkin as possible. And then once I've got the bit clear of the skins, then I will chop it into little cubes. And it doesn't really matter how big they are. What we do want is for them to just cook through entirely. So if we've got a big piece like this, maybe cut it into small pieces so that all of the pieces are more or less the same size, and will cut and will cook pretty evenly in the oven together. Now we have all of the pumpkin and it's been cut, and so what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of olive oil in there, and and then sprinkle it with a little bit of salt. And then go ahead and take a spoon and just mix it all together. Make sure that it all gets evenly covered with olive oil, which just helps to protect the pumpkin a little bit while it's cooking, and also it helps capture some of the delicious aromas that are coming out of the pumpkin, as well as helping it brown just a little bit. So now when it's evenly mixed, I'll go ahead and take a sheet pan, and I've got a silk pat, which is just a protective layer, but you can use baking, just parchment paper or anything to protect it. So go ahead and spread it evenly on our pan so that it cooks as quickly as possible. And then, as I mentioned before, I have the oven preheated to 400 degrees, and so I will put it in the oven for 20 minutes and then take it out and stir the pieces around, and then another 25 minutes. So now it's been 20 minutes, and as you can see, the tops of the pumpkins are starting to brown just a little bit, and they're just getting a nice rich color. They're softening up quite a bit, so I'm just going to stir them around a little bit. Make sure they get evenly cooked on all sides. And then I'll put it in for another 20 minutes, and then it will be ready. They're probably ready in about 10 minutes, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave them the extra 25 so that they brown another little bit. So the pumpkin has just come out of the oven, and I've put it into this pot, and I'm going to let it cool just a little bit. And the other things we're going to use is our homemade vegetable stock, which I've got in this container. Then I've got some cinnamon powder, some nutmeg, just a tiny little bit, and then some maple syrup. We've already added salt to the pumpkin, so it's possible it may not need any more, although once we're mixing it, then we will taste it and see. So now we're going to blend together the ingredients and see how it goes. To begin with, we're going to just cover the pumpkin with vegetable stock. I like my soups very rich and thick, and so I try to do more or less the same proportion of vegetable to pumpkin to vegetable stock. So there's just covering it, maybe a little bit more, and that should be enough. And then nutmeg. It's a very powerful flavor, so you just want a little tiny bit. We're making soup for about 4 people, so I would say about 1/8 of a teaspoon. Cinnamon combines very, very well and brings out the sweetness, so even though one maybe doesn't add any sweetness, the aroma of the cinnamon, since we associate it so much with sweet things, is going to make it taste sweet. But I am going to add a little bit of sweet, and this is maple syrup, so maybe about 1 teaspoon of maple syrup. And I'll just take my hand blender and begin to blend it all. Okay, so now I've blended it to a very smooth puree. And we're going to see that the consistency is very, very thick. It's almost like baby food. So it might be just a little bit too thick. I will add just a touch of this vegetable stock. So I don't want to lose the thickness, but I definitely want it to feel like a soup. And because it's so thick, a lot of people think that there's cream in it, because it's quite creamy, but there isn't. It's just pumpkin and vegetable stock. So let's go ahead and give it a taste. Absolutely delicious. So there we have it, some pumpkin soup. I don't feel that it needs any salt. Just the salt that we sprinkled on the pumpkin as it was baking is enough. The cinnamon definitely gave it a lot of sweet flavor, as well as the maple syrup. And then you can taste the rich, rich pumpkin. An absolutely delicious and very healthy soup. Enjoy.